Hello and welcome to the Standout Sessions. Today I am joined by the fabulous Steve Bustin, who is one of our headline speakers at the Speaking Business Summit in October 2024. Hello Steve, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Really well, really good. Thank you for joining me. Now, I understand that you have some tips that you'd like to share with speakers as a little bit of a taster for what's coming up at Summit, and you've got some tips for more basic tips and then some more advanced. Shall we start with the intro level ones? What can you share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, any speaker needs to stand out on stage because it's one of the ways that it's one of the things that will get you booked, quite frankly. And if you don't stand out, then that tends to suggest that you are fitting in or just sort of fading into the background. And that's not a great place to be as a speaker. You need an audience to really focus on you. So yes, you do need to stand out every time you're on stage. And that's whether you are on stage in front of 600 people or you're on stage or at the front of a room with 4 people around a meeting table. I think, we often just assume that everybody's talking to big rooms, and a lot of people aren't. So yeah, I've got 3 tips for new speakers or emerging speakers to stand out on stage, and I've got 3 tips for those of us who are a bit more experienced, maybe been around a bit longer, to things that we need to think about, maybe reconsider, maybe think critically about what we're doing at the moment.
Okay.
So should we start, with the new speakers?
Let's do that. Go for it. What's number 1?
I think my first real tip for those who are maybe new to the industry, new to speaking, is don't do the same as everyone else. I think there's a tendency, particularly, actually coming to PSA meetings and things, you might see certain people doing things very particular ways. Oh, I like that. Yes, I can do that. Oh, that's clearly how you do it. And actually, don't try to copy somebody else. Apart from anything else, that's their material and things, and even in style. So find different approaches, find different styles of presenting. Might be use music, don't use slides, speak as a character. Don't ask everybody to turn to the person next to them. There isn't really a right way to present. I think that's one of the things that we need to get across. That there isn't a right and a wrong way to present. There is absolutely your way to present.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the key to it. It's finding your way and being as individual as you can. Really help to stand out. So don't use the same stories as other people. Don't use the same quotes. If I hear Maya Angelou's quote about people won't remember what you said and what you did, or remember how you make them feel, I will scream. Because too many people use it. So actually, nobody who uses that sort of quote is standing out. So find your own personal presentation style and make that as good as it can be.
Brilliant. That's great. Lots of really good advice there for new and emerging speakers on tip number 1. Thank you very much. Tip number 2, please, Steve, for new or emerging speakers. What advice do you have?
I think that everybody who is an emerging speaker, and to an extent an experienced speaker as well, don't just practice your speeches or your content, rehearse. And I think there's a difference. I think too many people will just sort of stand there and they'll maybe have some notes and do something, I'm going to talk about that, then that story, No. You need to deliver your whole presentation out loud as you will standing on stage. And if that means giving it the full welly, you need to do it. If you're rehearsing, then actually you're going to find the bits that trip you up. You're going to find the bits that maybe don't flow, maybe the bits where you start to bore yourself, quite frankly. And if you're boring yourself, you're going to bore your audience. So, I've used the adage before. People who've heard me speak on stage will have heard me say, rehearse, critique, hone, repeat. Rehearse, critique, hone, repeat. So rehearse properly, deliver it. And I would actually say, prop up your phone in the corner and video it. Watch it back and critique it. Now, you will be your own harshest critic by a country mile. But it's actually start looking at it critically and think, how am I coming across to an audience? What am I doing in my hands? Are there vocal tics starting to come through? You can then hone it and then repeat. And go through that process 2 or 3 times if you can, to really make the content as good as it can be. And in fact, that's an ongoing process. A keynote, a speech, a presentation, whatever it is never really finished as far as I'm concerned. There are always going to be things that you can tweak and hone and change, and also it freshens it up for you. So I would rehearse, critique, hone, repeat. I'd also say don't do it alone. get help,
Yeah.
get somebody else to watch it, either sitting in front of you or on video. Get a coach, find a mentor, build a mastermind group, and get them to critique. Now, ask for honest feedback, because that's what you want, is you want proper, useful feedback. And that's not just about, these are things you need to change. One of the things I hear so often, again, I've seen this in action at PSA meetings, is the positive feedback is actually just as useful. We tend to say, oh, we'll say something positive and then we'll say something constructive, as if the positive isn't useful. If somebody's saying, this is a brilliant speech, I love the way you do this, listen to it.
Listen to it. Great.
I think a lot of us will only ever hear the negative, and actually we need to hear the positive as well and take that on board just as much.
Yeah, definitely. More excellent advice. I spoke to somebody at a PSA event recently who said, well, when I practiced the speech, I did it in 5 minutes, or whatever the allotted time was. And I said, did you rehearse? Because I remember you saying this to me before, that we have to rehearse. And I was saying that when you rehearse, you'll find out that it takes longer. And that's why they'd come off stage and were surprised that their 5-minute practice, it hadn't worked in 5 minutes. And they realized that they weren't rehearsing. So fabulous tip number 2. Thank you very much, Steve. Tip number 3, please, Steve, for new and emerging speakers. How can you help?
I think the other big tip, and this sort of taps into what I said earlier about don't do the same as everyone else. But I would say it's important that you are gloriously, unapologetically you. Don't try to fit in. Don't feel that there is a right way and a wrong way to present, to stand on stage, what to wear, anything like that. Wear what's right to you, wear what you look good in, wear what you feel comfortable in, wear what sets the right tone. The same goes with the style you might choose to present in, the way you do or don't use slides. People are going to book you and your image, and you need to let people know that. And if people decide that your image is not right for them, don't try to change to fit their image.
No.
Now, I'll give you an example. I've now got to a point where I will normally wear trainers on stage. Now, it's partly because I'm more comfortable in trainers. I have had back problems in the past, and actually I find trainers much easier to wear and more comfortable to wear than shoes with a hard heel. So it's become part of my look. And I gave a speech for JP Morgan a few months ago, and I was actually, should I put a suit on and proper shoes and all this sort of stuff? And actually, I was like, no, that's not really who I am. So I wore what I normally wear, which is normally smart jeans, funky shirt or a funky jacket, and funky trainers. And I now have a whole range of floral trainers I wear on stage, and they are kept in boxes.
We do need to add at this point that Steve's trainers are all funky and floral. They're not just trainers. Your trainers are stunning. They're fabulous. Love them.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you. But it was interesting because when I then spoke at JP Morgan, I stood out from everybody else, because everybody else, all the other speakers, were in suits and what have you, and sensible shoes. And I was me. And I was the one people remembered. I was one that people responded to because I stood out. I was a bit different, and I was authentically me. And I've discussed with a number of people at events and things that there are a lot of speakers out there who will try to fit in, and actually they're all much for muchness. When you see somebody who stands out, who is gloriously, unapologetically themselves, it really works. Pegeen Ekivera, I think, would be a good example. Some of you would have seen in Dublin at the Global Speaker Summit. There is nobody like her.
No.
You absolutely know what you're going to get, and she delivers. And I'm sure there are some organisations who don't book her. Does she care? No. Does she try to fit in? No. So be gloriously, unapologetically you, and understand what that means.
I'm going to write that in big letters on a wall somewhere in my office. So don't try to fit in, stand out, which ironically is our theme for the PSA this year. Stand out. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Steve. So you shared some really great advice for newer emerging speakers. There are people in the world who have been doing it for a bit longer. What advice do you have for more experienced speakers?
Well, I think first of all, I'd say the tips that we've given for newer speakers on the whole will often apply to those of us who've been around a while. And I think a lot of us will slip into bad habits, and I think actually it's worth bearing those tips in mind. But tips for experienced speakers, I think number one is, don't just hone your content, hone the craft of speaking. And it absolutely is a craft in the way that acting is a craft, or performing music is a craft. Anything creative is a craft. I think we need to hone that craft of speaking. And a great way to do that is to look for opportunities to speak that take you out of your comfort zone. A lot of us, we have our set content. We maybe have 2 or 3 keynotes that we deliver regularly. And actually, I think we can, I don't want to say sort of get bored or get boring, but I think we do slip into bad habits. And I think it's important as speakers that we start to stretch ourselves without taking the audience out of its comfort zone.
Do we get complacent as speakers?
I think we do. I really do.
Too comfortable.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, I mean, I know I have times when I can almost hear myself in my script, and I know, oh, here's that story, and here's that joke coming up, and here's that that piece of content. And I think it is sometimes we need to just shake ourselves up. So, for example, I think if you can find yourself an opportunity to talk to a very different audience and potentially on a very different topic, force yourself to go and give a talk on a topic that you don't normally speak on. It might be something you do as a hobby. And it's one of the advantages of it is it will help you to learn to play pretty much any audience. So it is something where, you know, when you suddenly find yourself in front of a room of, okay, I do a lot of talks for gardening groups, and it pays peanuts, it's paid a little bit of pocket money, but suddenly when you find yourself in front of a room full of, let's say, 40 people, and it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and it's very warm in this village hall, and they are falling asleep, you've got to learn how to play that. You know, and I think look for opportunities, think, what else could I speak on? Who else could I speak to? And view it almost, I suppose it is as a training exercise in a way. It's about honing the craft of speaking, because it forces you out of your comfort zone. It makes you reconsider what you do, how you do it, and you will learn skills that you can then take back into your regular business content.
Okay, so that means that I probably need to go and give talks to WI groups on the fun of riding a horse across Mongolia for 6 days.
Absolutely. Yes. Why not?
Okay,
I mean,
thanks.
there are lots of those sorts of groups out there. And they love speakers. And I've heard some people get a bit sniffy and, well, you know, I don't want to go and talk to the WI or to a gardening group or, you know, a hobby group. And yet actually you can learn so much as a speaker.
Good way of learning.
Doing it. And it gives you a chance. And actually, sometimes I can actually try out a little bit of content or a little bit of gag that then comes back into my business content. It's, you know, it's interesting just to find that crossover.
Very clever. I like it. Fabulous. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, please, Steve, for more advanced speakers.
Okay, and this sort of carries on a little bit from honing the craft of speakers, not croning the heart, honing your craft. I think as speakers and as experienced speakers, we need to build out our skill set. Very easy just to keep doing what we've been doing and doing it the same way. And I see speakers who are just they can do conference speeches and that's it. And I think you need to have other tools in your toolbox, other skills up your sleeve that you can use and roll out to give yourself the opportunity to play to new audiences and to play in different ways. And the market is changing at the moment. There are new demands for different formats, shorter, longer, more interactive, all this sort of stuff. So I think that you should be, most experienced speakers should have done at least some, if not a lot, of improv. Now, you and I are both improv fans. We've both done a lot of it. And I think we can both, it's just such a useful skill to have.
Definitely. I've learned so much about speaking and interacting with an audience from improv, and it's boosted my confidence massively. Really. And it's great fun.
Well, exactly. I have laughed, you know, I laugh so much when I'm doing improv. And it's taught me, particularly because I do a lot of compare work, that, you know, I can just bounce off an audience. And that if the brown stuff hits the big revolving thing, something vaguely appropriate will come out of my mouth. I can respond, I can be in the moment. And that to me is what improv teaches, is being in the moment, listening to what's going on around you and reacting accordingly, not being stuck on stage going, So I think improv's
what do I do now?
Yeah, exactly. The other one I think is stand up. Now, obviously, a number of people have done the PSA stand up night in the past, but I think stand up's a useful skill, quite different to improv because it's around scripting, it's around structure, it's around editing. stand-up is about really using as few words as possible to get your message across, which is a really useful skill.
Yeah.
Obviously, it also teaches you how to use humor. Again, it teaches you how to play any audience and how to work out when things are going well, how to respond if things aren't going well. So I think stand-up's a great one as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'd go further and say any sort of performing, acting, those sorts of things. Just it's stage time in a way, but with just in very different ways.
Yeah, different. You mentioned this to me a while ago, and I think I scrunched my face up at the time and said I could never possibly do stand-up. At which point you said, well, that's what you should do then.
Exactly.
So
I say if anybody's listening to this going, I can't do that. Absolutely can. You absolutely
but guess what I'm doing in about a month's time?
Are you doing a stand-up course?
Yes. I have booked, my partner and I have booked to go and do a weekend beginners stand-up course in London. I have no idea what to expect. We might hate it, but the great Steve Bustin said, go and do stand-up. So I'm doing it, and I'm treating it as part of my development as a speaker.
Completely. I mean, those courses are tax deductible, let's put it that way, because they are.
Exactly. Oh yeah, it's a business expense.
Yeah, it's training. You're absolutely improving your skills and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's, you'll love it. And it's one of those things where even if you don't have any burning ambition to suddenly become a stand-up comic, and it's a really hard way to earn a living, I have to say. I mean, I gigged on and off for about 3 or 4 years, and it's hard work, it's relentless. But it's just, in terms of speaking, it's just another tool to have, knowing how to structure a joke, a gag, how to respond. Yeah, it's great. You'll love it. I hope you love it anyway.
I will report back.
Good.
But like I said, if I never do it again, I don't mind. I'm just trying it, and I'm using it as a training example.
Great.
Okay, so that's tip number 2, pushing Chantal out of her comfort zone. Tip number 3, please, Steve, for more advanced speakers. What's your advice?
I think you need to be constantly renewing and reviewing and refreshing your content. I think, again, we get into the habit of, once we know something works, it's easy to tell. It's, here's a story that I know how to tell it. I know where the beats are. I know where the gags are. I know where the punchline is. I know where people are going to gasp, all those sorts of things. But we need to constantly renew our content to keep it fresh for an audience, but also to keep it fresh for ourselves. Again, I suspect I'm not the only one who occasionally finds himself launching into a story and thinking, here we go again. So find new ways to tell something, but also be, what's the word? Ruthless, I think, is the word, actually. And if something is no longer serving a purpose, it's got to go. I'll give you an example. I used to tell a story about the fact that I once appeared on Top of the Pops as a performer. I have performed on Top of the Pops. But now Top of the Pops came off air 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. Although it is a brand name that's still around, most people certainly under 30, and quite frankly even under 35, it's not a brand they're familiar with. It certainly doesn't have the sort of cachet that it once had to maybe somebody of my generation. So I was aware that story wasn't landing, or I was ending up having to explain it. So that has to go. So I then had to search and think and ponder about what story have I got that allows me to make the same point. But it was like, no, that has to go. So if there's something that is culturally a bit old, maybe it's an example that you use. Again, if you're using quotes, is this somebody who people are still familiar with? So I think, it's one of the things I see a lot of more experienced speakers failing to do, is to just review and refresh their content on a regular basis. And it keeps it fresh for you, keeps it fresh for your audience.
There have been times when I've slipped into, oh, here we go again with this story, and no, time to change it up. Wonderful.
Completely.
Steve, thank you so much. You've shared some fantastic tips this morning. We will be sharing this with our members and speakers around the world. And you will be headlining for us, won't you, at Speaking Business Summit from the 18th to the 20th of October 2024. Tickets are on sale, and I will make sure that there's a QR code or something in these videos so that everyone can book a ticket. Thank you so much. Great to see you, and we will see you on stage very soon.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.